So you can use addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division to combine two functions. I do have listed your operations on functions in this table here. So for addition, this is what it'll look like. F plus g of x. That's the same as adding f of x plus g of x. So you just add the two functions together. Subtraction is f minus g of x. So you take f of x, subtract g of x. Okay, so for that one, make sure you are writing that g of x in parentheses. Okay, since you're subtracting here, you have to distribute that negative to both numbers. Okay, so with that subtraction, you have to distribute that negative to both numbers when you're combining them. Then we have multiplication, so we have f times g of x. That's the same as just multiplying and then FOILing out your answer. Okay. Then division, f over g of x. So we have f of x over g of x. You do have a domain restriction here. So g of x cannot equal 0. So once you find your answer here, so I had f of x is 2x, g of x is negative x plus 5. You have to take that denominator and set it equal to 0. Okay, you have to take that denominator, set it equal to 0 so you can find that domain restriction. So from here, subtract 5. So you have opposite of x equals opposite of 5. So x equals 5. So that's where they're getting this x cannot equal 5. So wherever you find x to equal, it cannot equal that. Okay, your denominator cannot be equal to 0. It's undefined then. So don't forget about this step when you're doing that f of x divided by g of x operation. Okay, questions on our different operations here. These are the only 4 that we're going to talk about today. Tomorrow we'll go into some combinations. All right, so then example 1. We are given f of x is 3x squared plus 7x, and g of x is 2x squared minus x minus 1. Okay, and we want to find each of these functions. So first we're going to do the addition operation. So we're going to take f plus g of x, which is just the same as f of x plus g of x. So I'm going to take my f of x function, which is 3x squared plus 7x. Okay, so just replacing f of x with its function. Add on our second function here, which is g of x. Okay, so that is 2x squared minus x minus 1. Okay, from here we're just going to do what we did on Friday. We combined like terms. Okay, we're just adding these two functions together, so just combine those like terms. So I have a 3x squared and a 2x squared. Okay, add those together. That's 5x squared. I have a 7x and a negative 1x. So I have 7x minus 1x. So you get 6x. And then I only have this one constant here, which is still just going to be negative 1. Okay, and that would be my final answer. Okay, I don't have a domain restriction on this one. I can plug in any number for x and it'll spit out a y value. Questions on letter A? Okay, then looking at letter B. This time we're doing that subtraction operation. Okay, so we have f minus g of x. So again, that's just saying f of x minus g of x. Okay, so we'll take our f of x function, subtract our g of x function from that. So I can replace this f of x with its function. Okay, so that's 3x squared plus 7x. I'm subtracting my g of x function, which is 2x squared minus x minus 1. And yes, I want you to include these parentheses. You need to subtract that whole quantity. Okay, this is the one where you have to distribute that negative to all of those numbers. Okay, so I need to distribute this negative to that 2x squared, to that minus 1x, and to this negative 1. Okay, you have to distribute that negative to all of those numbers. So that'll be my next step here. So I still have 3x squared plus 7x. Distributing my negative, I end up with negative 2x squared. I have negative 1 times negative 1, so that turns into a positive. Okay, and again, negative 1 and negative 1 multiplied together turns into a positive. Okay, so don't forget that step. Now I can combine like terms. Okay, so I have a 3x squared and a minus 2x squared. So that's just x squared. I have 7x and 1x. And then again, I just have this single constant, that's plus 1. And again, this is a quadratic, so I don't have a domain restriction here. I can plug in any number for x, and it'll give me an answer. Okay, questions on addition or subtraction of those functions? All right, then in example 2, we're going to move into multiplication and division of functions, but now we're given two different functions. Okay, so we're not using these same ones here, we're using different functions. So for letter A, we want to take f times g of x. So that's the same of f of x times g of x. So we're just multiplying the two functions together. So make sure you write it as a quantity, so you add in those parentheses around it. So f of x is 3x squared minus 2x plus 1. That's my first quantity. Since I'm multiplying together, I'll again add in that parenthesis here. My g of x function is x minus 4. Okay, this is where I have to FOIL. Again, this is what we did on Friday. Okay, so take each number, FOIL it to the 2, FOIL it to those 2, FOIL it to those 2. So I have 3x squared times x. That's 3x cubed. I have 3x squared times negative 4. That's negative 12x squared. Next, I'm going to move to this negative 2x. Do the same thing. So negative 2x times x is negative 2x squared. Negative 2x times negative 4 is positive 8x. Last one, move to this 1. 1 times x is just x. And 1 times negative 4 is negative 4. Okay, again, you're just FOILing that out. So now that I've written it all out, I can combine like terms just like I did before. Okay, I don't have another x cubed, so I can just write that one out as 3x cubed. I have a negative 12x squared minus 2x squared, so I can combine those two to get negative 14x squared. I have an 8x and an x, so again I can combine those. Did I mess something up? No. Is this what you're getting, right? Yeah, okay. Okay, This one again doesn't have a domain restriction. Okay, I can plug in any number for x and it'll spit out an answer. Okay, questions on the multiplication? We're doing okay so far? All right. Last one, letter B. This one is the division problem. Okay, so we have f over g of x. That's the same thing as f of x divided by g of x. Okay, so did you not enter for attendance? Now you're tardy. So again, I can just plug in my f of x function here, which is 3x squared minus 2x plus 1, okay, over our g of x function, which is x minus 4. Now this one we do have a domain restriction. Okay, our denominator cannot be equal to 0. So that means below here, since this isn't even supposed to be here, below here I would set my denominator equal to 0. Okay, and I just solve for x. So I'm going to add 4. So I end up with x is equal to 4. Now, like I said before, whatever you find x to be equal to, it cannot equal that because we don't want our denominator to equal 0. So attached to this, I would say x cannot equal 4. So whatever answer you find there, you write it as x cannot equal that number. Okay, and that's only for that division problem. Okay, that is your domain restriction. And that would be your final answer. Okay, questions on why I did the last problem the way I did? Why I set it equal to 0, why it cannot equal that number, anything like that. Why you use the denominator? So whenever you have a number over 0, it's undefined. So we can't have that bottom number equal to 0 because then our function would be undefined. So there's an actual asymptote at that value. So your line won't go through it. It'll go near it but not at it. Okay?